За бичлэг эхэллээ. Юусэдтэнүүд наач. За энэ нэг бичлэг болсон. Ямар бичлэг вэ? Уншаад байгаа. Sorry. Галтгаан дэм хийж байгаа болохоор чанга дутаа байгаа.
What's up guys, welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Ordell, and in today's video we're covering the Black Line Defense / Jensen system, a super fun and aggressive option for Black that's going to give you a chance to fight for a decisive
Black Line Defense гэнэ.
result. Now one could also argue that the Black Line defense is a little bit single-dimensional, meaning that Black really only has one narrow focused game plan, but even if White stops this, and we'll cover a couple ways that they can do this later on in this video, we're going to have a playable game, and we'll cover some of those lines and variations later on in this video. Now the more traditional move setup here is against e4, in which case we're going to start off with the perk defense, allowing White to take full control of the center of the board, in which case we're now going to play knight f6, and following knight c3, we're not going to go with the main line of the perk or even the check perk with c6, but instead this move knight d7. Notice how there's not really a ton that White could have done from stopping us making these three moves. Very simple game plan. Put your pawn on d6, get both of your knights involved, and then the very next move, let's say White plays the most popular option of knight f3, we are now going to expand in the center with this move e5, putting some pressure on d4. And look, if White decides at any point in this opening, guys, to take on e5, we always have that option to just take right back, activating our bishop on f8. Right now, we're actually eyeing bishop b4 ideas, pinning this knight to the king on e1 with a very active game. And if White tries to stop this with a3, that's fine. We can play c6, continue with bishop e7, castle kingside, and we always have those b5 and a5 ideas available, expanding on the queen side of the board. We have very nice development.
Ер нь ээлжид ер нь одоо паунуудад түлхчихэд айгуу дайжгүй санагдсан. Ягаад тэгэхээр ингээд хоёр тал ингээд биенийхээ писүүдийг эдэлцээд явангууд late game-д өгөхөд ирэхтсэн. Хин урдаа байгаа хүүтэй байна. Тэрийг хин зөв хамгаалж чадсан. Тэрний илүү хожих магадлал өндөр болоод байгаа. Ягаад тэгэхээр queen-ийг гаргах учраас те.
Three minor pieces out, a centralized pawn on e5, a safe and castled king on the king side of the board.
Тэгэхээр king side болохоор ингээд safe хадгалаад queen side болохоор амар push-лээд оруулаад амар aggressive тоглол гоё санагдсан. Миний хувьд.
And guys, I'm taking Black here any day of the week. Now what happens if White decides not to take the pawn on e5, but keep this tension and just continues developing with the move bishop c4? Well, in this case, we're now going to play the move bishop e7. And most players here are probably just going to castle kingside, but I do want to mention this move bishop take.
Энэ бичлэгүүд ч тоглолт руугаа орчоо. 20 минут юм байна. Ер нь 30 гэхээр арай урт. Амар удаан байгаад.
F7 with check. Let's take a look at this and what to do against it, because at first sight it seems as if Black is simply losing this, because after we take the bishop, White's able to play knight g5 with check. Notice here, if king f8, knight e6 is played with a fork, winning the queen, and if king e8, knight e6 is played, and our queen cannot even move. So here we got to play this move king g8. The seam's losing after knight e6, forcing our queen to e8, and now knight takes c7, attacking both our queen and our rook. But guys, I'm going to argue that I would actually rather have Black in this position. Now guys, these are very sharp lines and variations, but if you watch this video through, or at least this section of the video through a couple times and really try to get these ideas, you're going to be winning games more quickly than not. And we're starting off with this move of queen g6, attacking the pawn on g2. And look guys, this doesn't look very threatening, at least at first sight. Most of the time, you're probably going to see White just snatch off the rook. But let's say White does castle kingside here. In that case, we are going to save our rook by playing rook b8. We're simply going to have a piece for two pawns, and pretty solid development, right? I mean, both of our knights are out, our bishop, our queen, and we can then continue with the key ideas such as h6, king h7. Our king is a little bit awkward, but with that maneuver, we're going to be okay. Get both of our rooks involved. We're also putting pressure on both e4 and d4 as well, and we are in business. What happens if White does take the rook on a8? Well, in that case, we're going to take on g2, attacking this rook. White could play a move like king e2, trying to hold on to this rook, but against that, we're going to play knight takes e4. And guys, I'm not going to go super in depth on that line of variation, but let's just say after king e2 and knight takes e4, there's simply no way that White is going to hang on very long without losing a ton of material. About a -4 advantage for Black. And what about this move rook f1? This is a much better idea for White. Really the only move that gives White a fighting chance. And against this, we're again going to take on d4. Now again, plug this variation chance computer system, it's going to tell you that queen takes d4 is really the only move that gives white a fighting chance, and that continues after knight e5. The only move here that gives white some kind of game is f3. A very not human move. If I was playing white, I would probably not find this. A move like queen e3 seems to make more sense, not allowing knight f3 with check, attacking both the king and the queen on d4. But in this case, we're still going to play knight f3. Look, and if king d1, we're going to take this rook, and that game's going to be over in just one more move, as white's going to have to give up that queen. And if king e2, trying to hold on to the rook, we're going to bring our light squared bishop into the action. Bishop g4. We have a ton of active pieces. We're currently threatening knight takes h2 ideas, checking the king, and simply winning that rook. And guys, this position is simply resignable for white. So y'all, the best move here for white is not to play something like queen e3, because again, we're just going to bring our knight in there, play bishop g4, and we're going to have a one game. The best move is f3. This may seem a little bit strange, but the whole idea is that if we do play knight takes f3, they're no longer losing a queen. They're going to give up their rook, but they're going to survive. Well, guys, against this move f3, though, we're not going to take. This move seems very strange, and that's why I recommend memorizing this line. This also works against the move f4, not just f3. This move, knight fg4. What on earth are we doing? Well, guys, against f3, which gives up this knight, or against f4, which in this situation would give up the knight on e5, we don't really care about giving up our knights, because we have this key idea of bishop h4 with check against the king. I mean, look, if a move like queen f2, thank you for the queen. If a move like king d1, in that case, we're simply going to take the rook off, and one move later, that game is going to be game over. And if this move rook f2 is played, let's slide our queen up to g1. And if a move here like king e2, I mean, really, no matter what white plays, king e2, king d2, we're going to have some kind of force mate. In this situation, playing bishop takes g4 with check. And following this move, king d2, we can now play bishop g5, attacking the king yet again. I mean, guys, talk about an active bishop here, an active knight on e5, taking away d3, and this queen on g1 is also no joke. Here, white has to play this move, queen e3, but in that case, okay, thank you for the rook, and after knight e2, thank you for the queen and the knight. This game is over at move 20. The one line in which black has to be a little bit careful here is not when white takes this knight, because obviously we have bishop h4, and this king's just not going to be surviving very long, but this move of queen d5 with check against our king. Most players would probably be tempted just to play this move king f8, but guys, if we do this, white's able to take our knight with check against our king on f8. So in this case, we're simply going to bring our knight back to f7. This may seem very passive, but again, we're really riding on this bishop h4 check threat. And here, if a move like queen c4, which by the way is the best option, preparing for bishop h4 check with king d1 so that this rook is defended. In that case, let's try to distract this queen by playing bishop e6. Against queen e2, we're prepared to play knight f2 with check and keep going after that king. And guys, this is one of those kind of black line defense positions that you want to get, playing aggressive and fighting for the win. So y'all, going back to this original position against the move bishop takes f7, black can definitely lose that if they're not prepared for the opening theory. But if you memorize those lines and variations that I just showed you, king takes f7, and then bringing that king back to g8 with that queen e8, queen g6, and queen takes g2 idea, you're going to be more than okay. But what happens if white goes for a more traditional option like castling kingside? Well, in this case, we're going to continue with c6, and the purpose of c6 is two-sided. We see this over a ton of different chess opening systems. First off, we're simply limiting the activity of white's minor pieces, specifically this knight on c3, and we're
гоё тий бишопууд нь жишээ нь энэ диагональ руу орсон. Тэгээд тэр диагоналаа давхар харах боломжтой. Тэгээ шууд ингээд авчих.
also eyeing ideas such as b5. Most of the time, white's going to play this move a4 because they don't want to worry about b5 and b4 ideas every single move they play. And against this, we're going to, again, continue with queen c7. And guys, if you're an e4 player, I mean, how black's been playing so far, it may not seem as if it's very threatening, right? I mean, it's not like black's playing bad. They're just playing solid chess, but it doesn't seem as if black is trying to win this game anytime soon. But guys, this is really when the main idea of the black line defense starts. So let's say white plays this move h3. We see this move all the time, and I actually think that this move could get white in quite a bit of trouble. We're going to cover why later on in this video, but really you see this move because white wants to play bishop e3, and they're worried about knight g4 ideas attacking that bishop. They don't want to go down the bishop pair, so we see this move h3, and now against this we see our traditional setup of h6. What are we trying to do here? Well, let's say white plays a move like rook e1. We're now going to continue with g5. black this key idea h6 and g5 expanding on the king side. And on top of that, with this move h3, we always have that g4 break, really forcing white to give up one of their protected pawns in front of their king. Now, on top of that, we want to get more of our pieces involved on the king side of the board and try to checkmate this king, including this knight on d7. We would love to get this knight on d7 to f4. So the traditional maneuver is knight f8, knight g6, and then throwing this knight into f4. Extremely active spot for that minor piece. And on top of that, rook g8 ideas are always fun, trying to blast open this open file. But what happens if white sees this g4 idea and doesn't want to allow it and plays a move here like knight h2? Well, in this case, we're simply going to continue with knight f8. And following a5, we actually see a master level game in this position, in which case black continues with knight g6. But against d5, black then continues with knight f4. Very simple game plan, h6, g5, expanding on the king side, and then getting this knight to that f4 square. Obviously, very active minor piece. And here white continued with the move a6, but now black, we see b5 attacking this minor bishop. And once that bishop ran away, we saw b4 taking on d5, taking on e4, and black went on to win that game very nicely. So y'all, with this move h6, that really covers the main idea of the black lion's defense, playing h6, g5, and getting that knight to f4, potentially putting that rook on g8, blasting that file open, and trying to checkmate this king. And if you ever do see white take on e5 at any point, that's okay. Simply take back. This pawn on c6 is also doing a pretty good job of limiting the activity of this knight on c3. And we're going to continue to play active chess. Now, if I were white here, what would I do? I'd probably play this move knight h4. As I said, the black line defense is a little bit single-dimensional. We really only had that one single plan of h6, g5, and knight f4. And look, if we can accomplish this, we're going to have a very nice game. But this move knight h4 is hard for black to deal with, because right now, if we do play g5, continuing with our normal game plan, this knight's just going to jump into f5, attack our bishop, attack our pawn, and we're the ones that are getting attacked in that position. So here we're going to switch the move order up with knight f8. And honestly, you can do this anyways. You can play knight f8 and then play the move g5 and bring your knight to g6, so that you have a little bit more flexibility in where you want to bring this knight, because sometimes you want to bring this knight to e6 and attack the center. And let's say white here plays a move like b3. In this case, I'm not going to recommend you play the move g5, because this knight is not on f3, this knight is on h4, and this knight can come into f5. And sure, we could take that knight right off the board, but even after that, this pawn's going to take back on f5, and our pawns are a little bit overextended, and we do have some serious weaknesses that we got to work through. Instead, my general piece of advice is that if you do see knight h4, white prepared to meet this whole h6, g5 idea, is realize that they're kind of ignoring their center for a little bit. Start to chip away at this center, starting off by taking on d4. And obviously this gets rid of our main plan, but I still think that black has a playable game. I mean, after queen takes d4, I personally like this idea of knight h5, simply attacking this knight. And look, I mean, if a move like knight f3, we can continue with knight g6, and if white tries to bring this knight into f5, we can just take that knight right off the board, and then continue with the move like knight h7, castle kingside. White is trying to put a ton of pressure on this pawn on d6, but notice at any point, I mean, let's say white plays this move rook a d1, we can now continue with d5. We've chipped away at the center. This knight went to f5, which distracted the pawn on e4, so we're the ones with the center pawn on e5. We're prepared to meet bishop takes e7 by simply capturing back, and black has a solid and workable game plan here. So y'all, that covers this move knight h4, which is a very key idea for white against the black line defense. They're probably not going to find it if they haven't seen this before, but if they have, you may see this move quite a bit. But if you do, I personally recommend just playing this move knight f8, not allowing that knight into f5. Some players like to play g6 after knight h4 and then bring this knight to f8 and then e6. I personally find that a little bit slow. I mean, my general piece of advice, again, if you see this move knight h4, start to chip away at the center and then just start playing chess. But again, it's really up to you. And again, as always, if white wants to take on e5, we're simply just going to capture back. And guys, this exact position with a different move order was actually reached by FM Zoran Tadic here playing with the black pieces. We're going to see how he used that h6, g5, knight f8, knight g6, and knight f4 idea to go on and get the win, really going aggressively after this king on g1. This is a really nice game, and I think you guys will enjoy it. Here we see white continue with queen e2, and now black, as always, g5, expanding on the king side of the board. Notice if we do get in this whole h6 g5 idea, this knight is not going to f5 anytime soon because both d4 and h4 are currently covered. We see this move rook e1 from white, and now from black, knight f8, knight g6, and knight f4. Very easy and simple game plan. Here white decides to snatch off the knight, in which case we now take with the g-pawn, opening up this key g-file. Again, guys, this is a key file in a ton of Black Lion's defense games, and we see black simply take advantage of that the very next move, eyeing this pawn on g2 and threatening to capture on h3 because this pawn is currently pinned to the king on g8. So here we see white get out of the way, and now black just continues with bishop d7. And now after rook a d1, rook g7. I actually really like this move, and its purpose is two-sided. First off, we're defending this pawn on f7 so that our king can castle queenside. And on top of that, for the rest of this game, this rook is not going to be in the way of our rook currently on a8. I mean, this rook can come behind the rook on g7 or even come to h8, depending on the circumstance, and we're going to have some very active chess. We're going to see this pay off later on in this video, but let's see this move rook g1 from white, defending the pawn on g2, and now castling kingside from black. Queen f3 from white. You can see white just bracing for the attack that's coming their way. And now from Tadic, queen b6, giving white a couple of different looks, eyeing that pawn on f2 and the pawn on b2, and following this move of b3, playing bishop c5, forming a battery ram against that pawn on f2. And after this move, rook d2 is played, we see bishop b4, very active chess from black, eyeing this knight on c3, which is currently defending the pawn on e4. So we see this move rook e2 getting out of the pin, defending that centralized pawn. And here from black, we see this h5 idea. Now, at first sight, it may seem as if this move is simply just trying to take away the square from the knight on h2 in the future. But guys, this move actually has a stronger idea behind it, as we're about to see. We see white continue with rook d2. It's pretty clear here that white's not really sure what to do, and I honestly almost can't blame them. I mean, this is a really hard position to play. All of black's pieces are extremely solid, and black hasn't been in a rush. We have a huge space advantage, and we've used that space advantage to slowly improve the positioning of our pieces and not feel the pressure to win the game in only 2 or 3 moves. But now we see this move bishop g4, very strong, defended by the pawn on h5. Here white decides to trade off rooks, and I mean, look, white could play this move queen d3, but in that case we're just going to snatch that queen right off, and this knight no longer has a defender. Let's take that knight off the board. And now after h takes g4, it seems as if white has got the piece back for only a pawn. But guys, look at this position. 2 very active pawns on f4 and g4. I mean, really just wiping out this entire third rank. We have rook h7 on the way, pinning this knight to the king on h1 with g3 ideas in the air as well. We have a ton of different play here. Even bishop d4 attacking the pawn on f2. This is just not a very active game for white. I mean, this knight on h2 can barely even move. The rook on g1 obviously isn't doing anything, and this bishop on d3 is surrounded by other light squared pawns. We as black, on the other hand, have a ton of activity in space, and we're going to continue with that rook h7 idea with about a minus 3.7 advantage. So here we don't see the move queen d3 because we could simply capture back on d3 and then win that knight. Instead, we first see this option of h takes g4. White going, look, I got to give up my knight or my pawn. Why not give up my pawn? But in that case, we're simply taking back. And now we do see the move of queen d3 from white. But now black could just take that queen and actually transpose into the variation we just covered, and black would have went on to have a winning game. But now black, because white has captured on g4 earlier, has this move of queen h8. Remember earlier how I said that rook g7 would pay off defending this pawn on f7 and also just giving us free scope of this back rank? Well, now we were able to slide our queen all the way to the corner, pin this knight on g3, and we now have rook h7 and g3 ideas. This game is nearly over, and really one of the only ways that white could get out of it is by playing this move rook d1 and then just handing us the queen and then handing us the rook. But guys, in this case, we're obviously up a ton of material. We're also attacking this knight on c3 and eyeing g3, which attacks this pin knight on h2. White tries to stop both with knight e2, but we play g3 anyways. We're not too worried about losing a pawn because of knight g4, again, reinstating a double threat against that knight. We're about to win this knight the very next move, and because of that, white resigned the game. So guys, that really covers the theory behind the black line's defense, that whole h6, g5, and
Яаж эхэллээ? За 18-6 дөрөв юм шүү. 18-6 секунд.
White to take full control of the center of the board.
Эхлээ хүүгээр эхэлж байгаа юм тий. 18-6.
F4 idea, but as I mentioned,
Хүүгээд үл эхлээ. Мороо гаргалаа, нөгөө мороо.
it's a little bit single and narrow focused. We saw how knight h4 really slows down black a bit. And in this position, white doesn't have to play a move like knight f3. Now, you're probably going to see something like this more times than not, but white could play this move f4, which obviously against e5 kind of shows us that our whole game plan of h6, g5, and knight f4 is not going to happen. We're facing a whole new ball game. And I mean, look, I still think that this is playable for black. If white decides to take on e5, we're simply going to capture back. And now if white wants to play a move like knight f3, trying to put as much pressure as they can on the pawn on e5, we can just play bishop d6 and continue to play natural chess. If white continues to take again, we can take back with the knight. And at first sight, this may seem a little bit concerning because white can capture our queen and our king can outcastle and white's king can. But again, I'm not too worried about this. I would give a very slight advantage to white, but from a practical standpoint, we have two very active minor pieces and this pawn on e4, which is currently isolated. I mean, even against this move of bishop g5, pinning our knight on f6, we're just going to continue with this move c6. Whole idea being if white wants to castle with check, we're going to play king c7, really trying to protect our king from any knight d5 and knight b5 check ideas because of that very valuable pawn on c6. And even if white continues with a move like bishop f4, pinning our knight on e5, we can play bishop d6 with knight d3 check ideas in the air. And if this move bishop takes f6 is played, we're simply going to take back with the pawn. And we do have isolated and double isolated pawns, but at least for the near future, I have a hard time seeing white really going after these weaknesses. In fact, right now, let's say white plays a move like knight f3, we can actually continue with knight g4, eyeing knight f2, and black is the one in the driver's seat here. If white stops this threat with rook d2, we slide our bishop over to h6 and pin that rook to the king. And if a move here like rook e1, okay, we continue to develop bishop e6, rook d8, and we're just playing chess. So y'all, if you see this move, f4, when you're trying to break through with e5, playing the line defense, play it anyways. We're okay. If white tries to trade off all these pawns and then take on d8, we're going to have a very playable game. Now, what happens if white continues here with a move like knight f3? There's a few different things that we can do, but my personal suggestion is just taking off this pawn on d4. And after knight takes d4, we do have some flexibility in how we want to face the rest of this game. We could play a move like knight c5, really trying to double up on that pawn on e4. We could play a move like c6, bishop e7, or even continue with g6, trying to fianchetto this bishop. And really, it's up to you how you want to go from here. Thanks for watching today's video. If you'd like to see our...
Nice. Амар гоё амгалт шүү дээ. За 3 гейм. Эхлэе та. Ялч хөдөлгөх гээд энэ тий. Би тэрийг идэх гэж бодож байгаа шүү. Гэсэн чинь өөрөө идүүлэх гэж. За. Тоонд орсон хүү амар ашигтай. Тэгвэл хамгаалах зэрэг хамгаалах. Очих юм бол их дэжгүй байх тий. Шалгаж тийм үү? Show me what Oh, no. What the heck was that? Би энийг хонголгоч юу? Жохон завгүй. Simple тоглох уу? Чиглэлөө тий. Ингэж бол. My god. За би өчгчээ. Энэ ойлгомжтой ийшээ орж ирнэ л дээ. Арай. Заавартай. Санаа эрэхтэй надад товтлохооны нэг тийм зүйл заавал байх хэрэгтэй байна. Ямар ч товтлох аргагүй шууд үзээд байгаа. Ер нь тэгтээ ийш очоод юм юм бэ те. Энд ч ийш очих хэрэгтэй байсан юм те. За. Албаар өгч байгаа нь би нүүдэл төрүүлэх гэдэг. Давталгаанд зориулж. Гэтэ амар муу аргалах л та. Гэтэ ветэртэй шүү. болонд байгаа юм чинь. Юу нэг ахгүй. Хэрэгтэй ч юм шүү гэсэн. Ингэж. Ингээд ийшээ дэрч юм шиг болоод. бландрууд багасаад байгаа юм шиг санагдаад байна. Одоо зүгээр солилцол баг болчих юм шүү. Миний хувьд бол өөрөөр нь хаах. Өөрөөр нь хаах. Гэтэ миний юм амирыг болчихлоо. Яах ёстой юм бэ? Дэвлэх хэрэгтэй юу? Тийм бах тий. Гэтэ энэ ямар тэнийг барилсан орч юу? Нэг солилцох юм уу? Нэг үлдээжүүлэх айгу итайхан байна. 2 эсрэг 1. Тэгтээ энэ өөхөө яаж авах вэ? Амар амгалтай доллар хэрэгтэй. Thank you bro. Thank you very much. Одоо солилцож хэрэгтэй тий. Зүгээр сайхан солилцож хэрэгтэй. Одоо ашигтай. Энэ цаг нь дуусчихлаа шүү дээ. Гэтэ сейф тоглол би бас ялах боломжтой л доо. Oh no, blunder гинэ. Би blunder хийгээгүй юм байна. За 3 дахь гейм нэг иймэрхүү байлаа. Камера солиогоо тоглосон шүү дээ би. Never mind. 900 бизнес. Би амар муу болсон юм байна. Энэ дандаа номны үг л шүү дээ. Ингээд номны үг. Миний winner chance болохоор 6. Тэр яаж тоглож байсан. Ой. Хамаагүй шүү дээ. Идлээ. Тэгэл гараа авчихдээ. Тэг яах юм? Чадахгүй still I'm winning. За. Би ингэж бичсэн чи. Баярлалаа.